Good morning, Lakehills. How's everybody doing this morning? Happy Father's Day. And again, as Danny said, guys, milk it out. It's the only day you got, so have some fun. It is always a privilege, as Chris and I have gotten to know one another, to be able to speak here. I've spoken here once before on Palm Sunday. And my name's Ken Burkey. I was a pastor, senior leader at Green Valley Community Church just up the hill for 24 years. And God did some and is continuing to do amazing things there. And I am now, I've had people say, hey, Ken, I hear you've retired, which is wishful thinking. But no, God has called me to lead a movement based on the chapter Isaiah 58 that to help awaken and equip churches to serve the poor and the broken in their areas, both locally and globally. And when I find like-minded churches like this and many others, we begin to partner and just strategize how to do that. Isaiah 58, if you're not familiar with the passage, it's broken into three parts, where the first part is God is frustrated with Israel because they're going through all these religious activities, but they've forgotten about justice. They've forgotten about the poor. They've forgotten about the homeless. And God simply says, I'm not impressed by your religious activities. Go follow my heart and my passion to care for the least of these. And when you do, my blessings will come upon you. And my blessings will just blow you away how much I want to take care of you. And I look back at 24 years at Green Valley, and I realized we weren't perfect. We made a lot of mistakes, but God's blessing was upon us, not because we were smarter or better than anyone else, but because when your mission is to serve those that the world has forgotten, that the world has judged, God's heart is close to the brokenhearted. And when churches begin to do that, then churches get close to the heart of God. And so that's my new mission. My new mission is to just help in any way I can to awaken and equip the church. And I'm excited about this church and this study that you're in Ephesians, and this is a perfect chapter for me to share about. Ephesians chapter 4. Let me read you this part. This is Paul describing about what a healthy church looks like and what really a church that is following the mission and the passion of God looks like. He says, therefore, a prisoner for serving the Lord, I beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you've been called by God. Now, just stop right there. If you are a follower of Christ, you've been called by God. Not just pastors, not just worship leaders, not just elders, but every person who steps over the line of faith to say, I'm going to follow Jesus, you are now called. So if you haven't crossed over that line of faith, know that God has called you. He's just waiting for you to take that step. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. He's giving us a healthy picture of the church. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit. That's what I love about this church. You serve at Green Valley. You're partnering with other churches because each church is a reflection of God, but we're really one body. All the churches together. And one Spirit, just as you've been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. However, he says, each one of you have your own gifts, a special gift given to you through the generosity of Christ. So this is the beauty of the church. When the church is unified, one purpose, one calling, but we're all using our unique gifts, that's when the church becomes powerful. It's when Bill Hybels, Pastor Bill, who said, the church is the hope of the world when it's working right. And when it's working right is when we're unified for the purpose and the mission that God has called us to, but we're all using our unique time, talents, and treasures. You know, I was a business major at Sac State here, and I didn't really want to go into ministry. Definitely never wanted to be a senior pastor, but God plays tricks on all of us. And 24 years later, I became a pastor young. And at Green Valley at that time, it was a very small church. And we prayed a crazy prayer. Help us to use every square inch of this building. And God blessed that over and over. Living out, trying to look at Ephesians chapter 4 and say, let's be that kind of church. Lakehills, you are that kind of church. And God has done and is doing and is starting new things here that is going to be very powerful. Don't underestimate the calling that God has in your life, individually and as a body. When I was a young pastor, Pastor Rick Warren said, every senior pastor needs to write out a dream for their church. Needs to write out, this is my dream. And so I wrote, about 20 years ago, I wrote a dream for Green Valley. 24 years later, I realized it wasn't really Green Valley's dream, but it's really God's dream for the church. And I'm sharing this all over the country. And I'd like to share with you God's dream for the church and kind of fit yourself into this dream. It'll be on the side screens here. I'll just begin to share. This is what I wrote about 20 years ago. God's dream for the church. The first one is this. Well, let me read this first. Let's see how inventive we can be in encouraging love and helping out. Not avoiding worshiping together as some do, but spurring each other on, especially as we see the big day approaching. What we're doing here is very important. I just wanted to remind you of that. So here's the dream. God's dream. God's dream for the church is a dream that where those who are hurting and hopeless and discouraged, frustrated, or confused. You know anybody in this world who's hurting, hopeless, discouraged, frustrated? Maybe you're like that today. God's dream for the church is where those who are hurting and broken, discouraged, can find love, acceptance, guidance, hope, encouragement, and forgiveness. This is the power of the church. We can't solve everyone's problems, but we can offer hope and acceptance and guidance and encouragement. I told you this story a few months ago, but when we do our water baptism in August down at the river in Lotus, whenever people walk into the water and get baptized, my question was, what got you here? And it was always this. Well, I was hopeless, I was hurting, I was discouraged, I was frustrated. And I came to church and people accepted me and they gave me hope and they pointed me to the forgiveness of Christ. We're far more powerful than we realize when we understand the needs and what the church and the message of Christ has to offer. It's a dream of sharing. It's a dream of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with tens of thousands of local residents and beyond to the world. You know what I'm learning in my travels, and I have a lot of conversations with people who aren't churchgoers. They're just people trying to navigate life. And this is what I'm learning. People have real problems with religion, but not very many people have a problem with Jesus. It's when religion gets in the way. Met a gentleman a couple years ago, and he came up to me. I was at a restaurant, and he said, "You're Ken Burkey from Green Valley." I said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "What's your name?" He introduced himself. He said, "Listen, I'm new to your church. I'm not sure what I believe, but I'm recovering from alcohol. I'm in recovery right now, and it feels like a safe place. It feels like something's right there." And he goes, "I got a question for you. You told that story about Peter walking on the water." He looks at me so sincerely, he goes, "Ken, did that really happen?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't there, but I believe it did. And let me tell you why," and kind of told him the story again. And then you could see this angst on his face. He says, "Ken, I don't know what to do." He says, "My dad's Mormon and my mom's Catholic. I don't know which one to join." And it just ushered me into this wonderful conversation about the person of Jesus. That it's not about labels and titles, but it's about following Jesus. I wrote this a while ago. Forgive me if I seem a little passionate about this, but here we go. I wrote this. I was kind of fed up with the religion, and so on my blog I wrote this. I said, Jesus was not an American. He was not a Californian. He was not a Republican or a Democrat. He was not a Presbyterian, Methodist, Pentecostal, or Baptist. He was not a member of the NRA, Greenpeace, or the local Moose Lodge. He did not have a preference of musical worship style, because his worship had to do with spirit and truth. He was anti-war, anti-revenge, and anti-hate. He said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." He's the creator of the universe, and it was his idea to make the stars and the moon and the seas and the mountains. Red, yellow, brown, black, white, they are all precious in his sight. Every color, every creed, every culture is a part of God's image. Jesus loves our enemies, and he prays that the terrorists will find salvation like Saul, who became a champion of grace. He loves you when you walk away, and he loves me even when I choose my own ways. Jesus is bigger than any of our big ideas. And heaven will be a much different place than our middle-class American ideas. It's Jesus plus nothing. It's not Jesus plus politics, denomination, lifestyle, or American. My prayer for the church is that we would allow Jesus to be bigger than any of those little boxes that we tend to put him in. And we would run towards his radical, counterintuitive, compassionate grace. And when I see people in recovery, or people who are hopeless, or people who are lost, or been burnt by religion, run to Jesus, there is freedom, and there is life, and there is hope. You see, it's a dream. It's a dream of thousands of members growing together in spiritual maturity through learning together, serving together, loving together, laughing together, and giving together. A real friendship, they say, begins when you say, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." I think C.S. Lewis said that. A real friendship begins. You see, there are people out there that think they're the only one. And when they walk through the doors and we're willing to humble ourselves and say, we're all wounded, struggling travelers that each day depend on God's grace, it awakens people to hope. It was interesting, one weekend we were doing a whole thing on our stage about adoption. And I found out a family was coming to church. Our whole thing was on adoption, and I knew I was going to be interviewing parents who talked about adoption and the challenge of foster care, and one of the stories was going to be about a woman who wanted to be a mom desperately but could not have her own kids, and it was that kind of topic and the need for foster care. But I found out a family was coming who had just, their mother had just been murdered in a bizarre case that, but they were coming because we had done their funeral. And I thought, what a week for them to come. This is not going to relate to them. They need to learn about grieving and about that hope, but they're not going to be interested in this. And at the end of the service, they said, this was the exact service we needed to go to. And I asked why, and they said, well, because it was hopeful to know that everybody struggles with something. Everybody has something that they're hurting and they're broken. And they said, we can relate. And they kept coming back, and they kept coming back. You are not alone. If you're new here, just know you are not alone in your struggles. We all have our struggles, and it's by the grace of God that he strengthens us and he lifts us back up. You see, it's a dream. God's dream for the church is where our love for one another will attract people to Christ. There's an old song, they will know we are Christians by our what? By our love. Not our theology, not our styles, not our rules, not our religion, by our love. A new command. Jesus says, I give you. See, he'd already given us the two great commands. Love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he said, let me give you a new command. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. The Bible says love covers a multitude of mistakes, of sins. You see, it's a dream where God's dream is that people would see the church and say, wow, church is a good thing. Church is leading the way. We need government help. We need institutional help. We need all of those things. But when the church leads the way, people will say church is a good thing. People have given up on the church in America. Many have. Church attendance is in decline for three top reasons. It's judgmental, it's irrelevant, and all they want is your money. But we can reverse that just by this simple dream. To follow Jesus and to love one another and to offer hope. But the church's reputation has taken a hit. It's like Philip Yancey's book, What's So Amazing About Grace, when the prostitute is trying to recover her life, and her counselor says, have you tried church? And she says, why should I go to church? I already feel bad enough about myself. My favorite compliment when I was at Green Valley is I would have people from the community come up and say, Ken, I don't go to church, but if I did, I'd go to your church. And I thought, well, you should try it sometime. People are hungry for relevant. The Bible's the most relevant thing, the scriptures. I gave a message a couple years ago, and it was one of those messages that you have to give a lot because it's important. But from a speaker standpoint, I thought, well, I've given that message. That wasn't real creative. It was just real straightforward. Ego, ego, ego. But the message was on forgiveness, how to forgive one another. And I had a lady who was there for the first time, came up. She goes, I've come from real institutional religion. She said, this was her quote. I wrote it down. I didn't know church could be practical. She says, I can apply it this week. Well, if we're not practical and we're not teaching stuff that we can apply, then we shouldn't be teaching it. You know, I share this story not to brag on Green Valley, but I share this story to say when we do the right thing, people can say, wow, church is a good thing. Green Valley, we got involved many years ago with the anti-sex trafficking movement in Sacramento because sex trafficking is such a big deal in Sacramento. And we partnered with the FBI and we bought backpacks and we did education and backpacks stuffed with supplies so that when they rescue girls, they had something right there. Worked alongside, and we didn't know, but the FBI every year gives a community award for the organization in each state that is doing something to make their community better. And Green Valley, we won the award a few years ago working, and so we won the FBI Community Award. Now each state gets one, so we were picked in California. We didn't even know this award existed. You don't serve God to get an award, but we got an award. So I got to go to DC, and I didn't realize he was going to be in the news so much these days, but we got this award, and what Mr. Comey, before we went out for the ceremony, he met the 50 of us, each state representative, in the back. And he came up to me and he said, do you know you're the only church in all 50 states that got this award? And he says, my prayer is that more churches will get this award. Because it was just, and there were amazing organizations in the 50 states. But my prayer is, as the church rises up, as I've been told by so many experts in the government, the people in the government say when the church leads the way, we can partner and do amazing things. You see, it's a dream where every person uses their time, talents, passions, resources for God's purposes so that we honor God by giving him our all, by giving him our best. Remember what it says in Ephesians 4, we're all called, and we're all called to offer three things. We all have time, we all have talent, and we all have resources. And whatever those are, you offer them. Some have 5 talents, some have a few talents, some have 1. Some have a lot of resources, some have a little, a widow's mite. It doesn't matter. Offer your time, talents, and treasures and watch God do amazing things. That's the body of Christ, diversity, with one spirit and one body doing amazing things. Let me talk about time for just a second because this one is a big challenge in America. Our Western culture is so busy. What I'm asking churches to do is not just do more. What I'm asking churches to do is to simplify and stop doing some things so that you can do the greatest thing. Solomon wrote, God made us plain and simple, but we have made ourselves very complicated. Have you ever looked at your to-do list and say, there is no way I can get this all done? Aren't we amazing at just filling up our schedules? Nobel Prize winner and world-renowned scholar Albert Schweitzer spent much of his career traveling on trains. And someone once asked him why he always traveled third class. And his answer was, because there's no fourth class. He simplified his life. Philip Yancey reflected on a trip he made to a monastery, and after the monk showed him his small room, he said, if you need anything, let us know, and we will teach you how to get along without it. Yeah. You see, this calling to live out the church, God's dream, is not to do more. It's to do the most strategic, to do the will of God. And with that, that means we have to say no to other things. It's to reprioritize. It's not just to go do more. I have a friend in 2008 when the economy collapsed. He had a business, and he simplified his business, and his prayer was this: God, let me do well, and my goal is to do well. I want to hire people who are desperately needing jobs. And he hired dozens and dozens of people. God blessed his business because he simplified and he clarified what the most important thing was. I have a friend, Christian Bosnan. He's South African, but he lives in New Delhi, India. And in New Delhi, if you've ever been to New Delhi, India, it's a tough, tough place. Beautiful city, beautiful people, but it's a tough place. He has chosen to live there. He has a upper level textiles business, sells upper end stuff, sheets and draperies and all types of things. It's beautiful all over the world, but he's chosen to have his factory in New Delhi, and he employs the untouchables, people with leprosy and people who are HIV positive that can't get jobs. That's his calling. It's his calling, and they've tried to kick him out of that country. His phones have been tapped, but he simplified his lives to say, this is my calling. God calls us to take our time and to simplify, to take our talents and to offer them. And there are a lot of talented people in the body of Christ. And the third thing God asks us to do is offer our resources. And one of the things I've been studying with faith-based organizations, global and local, is this: that government funding is being cut back and cut back and cut back. And it's time for the church to rise and let those resources be the key. They say that American Christians that take their faith seriously make about $1.25 trillion in the United States. If every Christian would just do the tithe, the 10% that God asks us to take care of widows and orphans and all of that, that would be $125 billion. It would solve, and I know money doesn't solve everything, but you combine that with strategic time and talents and partnering with amazing organizations that are serving the poor. We have a lot of potential, friends. A lot of potential. This is the other problem. I don't mean to lecture, but I'm finding out too, the American church, 90% of our expenses go to the already convinced. And so it's about rebudgeting and saying, what are our needs out in our community? When it happens, this is what Jesus said. What happens is you find out Jesus was right. It's more blessed to give than to receive. It really is. There's just more blessing. And you talk to generous people who have simplified their lives and are offering their talents and are giving, you find out they are the most joyful people. I want to just show you a picture of a friend of mine who just passed away this year. His name's Eldon Bowe. He was 88 years old, a retired school teacher from the Bay Area, went to Green Valley. When his wife passed away about 12 years ago, he said, the rest of my life is going to be paying God back for all the things that he's done for me. Eldon simplified his life, stayed out of debt, paid off his house. He ended up serving Meals for Wheels in this county. Meals for Wheels, he served over 50,000 Meals for Wheels in this county. He served at Common Ground, which some of you go and volunteer on Saturday mornings. He sponsored 32 children through Compassion International, monthly, 32 children. 32 times $40 a month. Do the math. I said, Eldon, how are you doing? He says, it just seems like the more I give, the more money I got in the bank. You had to know Eldon. He had such a great sense of humor. When he passed away, Compassion let Green Valley families sponsor the kids that he would sponsor. There's something powerful when the Bible says, when Jesus says it's more blessed to give than to receive, it's real. It's not just pie in the sky, someday. I was just in Washington, D.C., and they're talking about what happens. This is a total, well, not all secular, but it's part secular, part humanitarian, and part faith-based. But I was at the United States Global Leadership Coalition that is gathering to be lobbyists to say, don't cut foreign aid because it affects, in this world, the most vulnerable. And they found out that when you serve the poorest of the poor in our world, it blesses the United States in 3 ways. One, there was a whole military coalition there that says it makes our borders safer. The second one was business people saying, 95% of the consumers in our world are outside. It allows us to do business, and it blesses people with jobs here in the United States. And then the nonprofit, faith-based side, the humanitarian side, it said this, that, and to whom much is given, much is required. And it's humanitarian, and we are called to care of the poor, and it doesn't have anything to do with borders. And I thought, wow, I've never thought of it is more blessed to give than to receive in those ways. But it's very tangible. We are blessed when we give. It's a dream, and you guys do it here. Keep doing it. It's a dream where we'll continually reach back to invest in a new generation of children and youth who are our future leaders. It's where we look beneath the surface of their lives. You had some world-changing leaders sitting on this front row just a few minutes ago before they went back to their classes. It's to see beneath the surface of their lives and see God's gifts and potential in them. It's a dream where we will serve the poor, take care of the sick, and love those who've walked down the wrong paths of life, because that's where you actually meet Christ. Where you meet Christ, you may meet him in a worship service, you may meet him in a sermon, but I can guarantee you where you can 100% meet Christ, and that is when you love the least of them. I wrote about this a while ago, but this whole concept of worship, when I go to churches, you find out worship styles, which you have a beautiful worship team here, very sincere, but worship styles have divided churches. When it comes to worship, this kind of worship, Christ followers have not always been real Christ-like. Most American Christians think of music and singing songs when they hear the term worship. So when pastors and churchgoers are asked, what style is your worship at your church? What they're asking is this: do you have loud guitars and banging drums and worship leaders with tight pants and strange hair? Or do you have organs and robed choirs and hymn books? And the prophet Isaiah cut to the chase in Isaiah 1 when he said, quit your worship charades. I can't stand your trivial religious games. This is God speaking. Monthly conferences, weekly Sabbaths, special meetings, Marcia. I can't stand one more. You've worn me out. This is God speaking. But when you put on your next prayer performance, I'll be looking the other way. No matter how long or loud or often you pray, I'm not listening. And then God says this: go home and wash up. Learn to do good. This is what true worship is. Work for justice, help the down and out, stand up for the homeless, go to bat for the defenseless, seek justice, encourage the oppressed, defend the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. That's Isaiah chapter 1. Real worship is when our lives and churches reflect the work that God has called us to do. That is true worship, and that's where you meet Jesus. When I was a pastor at Green Valley, I'd be at conferences or somewhere, and somebody would say, what style of worship do you have at Green Valley? And I would say, our style is to work for justice, stand for the oppressed, shelter the homeless, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, fight for the defenseless, encourage the lonely, father the fatherless, and care for the widow. And they'd look at me like, you're crazy. And I would say, oh, you mean what style of music do we have? Well, we don't have robes or hymnals, but we do have loud guitars and banging drums and a worship leader with probably too tight of pants. But we also have some pretty cool sounding keyboards and a piano and an awesome choir. And they'd say, well, let's talk about that other style of worship that you were talking about. See, there's something very powerful when we get into God's worship and when we take care of the least of these. There's joy, there's purpose, there's energy. I got to make a confession. As a pastor, most of the time, I didn't really like doing weddings. I know that sounds sacrilegious, but unless I knew the people, you were a hired gun, you showed up and they were just hoping you didn't talk a long time and, do that, and everybody wants to go to the reception. So, you just don't feel real welcome unless, I knew the person or they were family or they were friends. But there was one wedding I will never forget. Kenny, Green, and Becky were homeless in Placerville in El Dorado County. And they got homeless for, reasons, addiction and loss and pain and all types of things. Well, they got loved by this community. They got loved by this community. And they were at Hangtown Haven when it was open in Placerville, and volunteers from this community, from this church, from other churches. And they found hope, and they found recovery. And then the way Hangtown Haven was structured, homeless people actually led for accountability and all types of things. And Kenny and Becky are leaders, and they begin to lead. And as they were leading, they got jobs. They weren't homeless anymore, and they fell in love. Well, I think they fell in love sooner than that. And they asked me to do their wedding. It's the best wedding I've ever conducted. Joy. Remember when Jesus said, listen, nobody else wants to come, so go out into the highways and byways and just invite anyone who will come. That wedding was at the Federated Church, Placerville, packed with people, with homeless, with people who had helped these two not be homeless anymore. And there was so much joy in the reception, so much joy. It was just so powerful. I'll never forget that. You could just feel this is where Jesus would go, and this is where Jesus would be. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Let's move on here because I don't want to keep you all day, but it's a dream. This is huge, Lakehills. This is a dream that we will keep simple. As a senior leader at Green Valley, I fought for this every day. We're going to love God and we're going to love people and we're going to allow no other issues to get in the way. It has to be both, though. You can't say you love God, but you don't really care for people. It's a dream. We're just going to keep simple. We're not going to let politics, we're not going to let disagreements in other peripheral areas get in the way of God's dream to love him and to love people. You see, it's a dream where we will constantly put ourselves in situations where we can't do it ourselves. This is called faith, friends. So that we will have to trust God and see him do amazing things. Faith. No more playing it safe. It's time for churches to obey and listen to the teachings of Scripture, to trust God and to step out and not allow fear to rule, safety to rule. It's time to go. See, fear does not come from God. It comes from the evil one. My son, when he was in college, he was in Southern California at Azusa Pacific, and he was working for a grocery store. And I'll never forget this phone call the day after, but what happened on a Sunday evening is he's working at the grocery store. He didn't call me till the day after, but he was leaving after his work shift, and as he's walking out the door, this guy runs right past him sprinting. And my son turns around, and the guy turns back to the doors and where my son is, and he starts shooting real bullets. And he's not shooting at my son, he's shooting at a cop who's running after him. So my son dives to the left to avoid bullets. When you're young enough, you can avoid bullets. But the cop jumped that way too, and the bullets kept flying, and there was a Frito Doritos nacho cheese display between them, and bullets were shooting through, and nacho cheese chips were flying everywhere, and Kenny said it was like in slow motion. It was like the Matrix. Everything slowed down. Long story short, he and the policeman avoided the bullets, but the guy just unloaded. And once the cop was able to kind of get an angle, he went and he shot the man. My son was fine, but he had to sit in the police station all Sunday night. He didn't call me till Monday to tell me what had happened. But he had to sit in the police station to give a police report. And that night he met a couple in the police station. This is where the story gets interesting. This couple was from the state of Washington, and the man was a professor of accounting at Washington State. He was a Christ follower and always wanted to teach accounting at a Christian college. So Azusa wanted to hire him to live in California. And he wanted to go, but his wife said, I don't want to live in California because it seems like a dangerous, wild kind of place. The university said, well, why don't you just come down and check out the place? So they did. They landed at the airport, and they were heading towards their hotel, and they said, let's stop by a grocery store to grab some snacks. And when they drove in front of the store, bullets started hitting the side of their rental car, the same bullets that the cop and my son were avoiding. This couple had been in California for less than 2 hours, and their worst nightmares were coming true. They'd become a part of a Hollywood movie. Well, the couple was okay, but they had to go to the police station, and this is where they met my son. And when my son's telling me this story, he says, Dad, this is the last time they'll ever come to California. Everybody left the reports, left the police station, went their separate ways, and about 3 months later, my son's working late one night at the grocery store, and he turns around, and there's this lady standing in the aisle, the lady from the state of Washington. And bonded by flying bullets, my son ran and gave her a big hug and asked her, what was she doing there? And she said this, they had decided to take the job, and move to California. And this was her line. She told my son, we're not going to let some random act of violence keep us from doing what God is wanting us to do. We're not going to let fear have the last word. I love that couple. I love that couple. My point is this, if we let fear stop us from doing the right thing, fear of lack of resources, fear of what people will think, fear of failure, fear of danger, it'll stop God's miracles and we will miss the thrilling adventure of faith. Maybe you're here today and there's some fear that is ruling your life. And if you could just let it go and trust God. Many churches in California in the 2000s stopped going to Mexico because there were reports that it was dangerous to go over the border. And what happened was children and families who desperately needed help didn't get help. Fear stops us from doing great things. Fear stops us from seeing miracles. But that can change so quickly. A church like this, positioned with Chris's heart, with your heart and what you do, as we begin to live out this dream, God can do amazing things. And you don't have to be a mega church. In fact, let me tell you, it's the middle-sized churches that just can position and say, let's go and storm the gates of hell and rescue people out of it. They're the ones that can make the difference. This is the last of the dream right here, because I could go on all day. It is a dream, this dream is a dream where God says, make yourself fully available to me, fully available in your worship, talents, passions, and resources. Fully available to love one another, forgive one another, and serve one another. This is God. You make yourself fully, wholly, unconditionally, unreservedly, unashamedly available to me, and I will blow your socks off. Yes, God uses that language. I will blow your socks off with the miracles that I want to do. God says today, dreams do come true. And this is God's dream. I would preach on this dream at least once a year at Green Valley, just to remind this is God's dream. And too often, we want the world to change when in reality, the church must change. But this is what Jesus said, you'll do greater things. You will do greater things. He says this to the church, you'll do greater things than even I. When we are unified with one body, one spirit, one Lord, yet we are offering our time, talents, and treasures to love and to offer hope and redemption. Jesus says we're the bride of Christ. He wants us to come and marry him, come into union with him, and then go fulfill his purpose to heal broken hearts and to set captives free. And God beckons us, and he beckons us. I close with this story. A friend and I were down in LA, and we were at Manhattan Beach, and we were standing on the Strand, and the beach was in front of us. And as we're standing there, a plane, you know those planes that have the banners in the back? A plane flies right over us, and it flies right over the beach. And the banner said, Maria, will you marry me? And my friend and I are like, oh, wow, good job, whoever you are that wants to marry Maria. That's quite a story. And then we looked at each other and said, let's not tell our wives about this because it's a little embarrassing the way we asked them to marry. But anyway, so we're sitting there, we're getting kind of verklempt, and it's like, oh, that's just, and so we look at the beach and we're like, well, where's Maria? And there was no commotion. Everybody was just laying on the beach. We're like, oh. And the plane got further away, and we're like, Maria missed the sign. And then we hear the plane. And whoever this guy is, he's probably calling the plane saying, she didn't see it. Come around again. And it came around a second time. Maria, will you marry me? And we're looking for Maria. And there's no Maria. Now we're feeling sorry for the guy. We should pray for him right now. It went, and the plane went, and the plane ended up going 4 times. 4 times and no Maria. And I was thinking, that's God. God doesn't do just one flyby in our lives and say, will you marry me? Will you come be my bride? God's relentless because of his love. And he'll just keep flying, and he'll keep taking loops until the day you stop breathing. He will take those loops saying, will you marry me? Will you marry me? Will you become the bride of Christ? Why? Because I have so many promises and so much purpose and so much joy. Will you marry me? Lakehills, you're the bride of Christ, and you will do greater things. Let's live out this dream. I love the end of Isaiah 58 because all God says is, not impressed by your worship, religious stuff. Go break the chains of injustice, serve the poor, take care of the widow, and then this is the promise. The promise is this. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. This is God's promise to us, the bride. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities, and then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes. Amen? You have a sign out here, I'm told. Green Valley had this same sign. It was a sign we would remind people all the time. A sign that as you leave the parking lot, we would just remind people, as we leave here today, we are now entering the mission field. God bless you all, and thank you again. See you soon.